Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to be taking a look at a 775 system. This is for a budget build competition. This time we're trying to build what we can with the 775. The budget was unlimited, however we just want to see how much we can squeeze out. So if you spend a load of money and a system that you've been able to build for a lot cheaper does better, then obviously you lose. But yeah, this is the starting point I've got here, just a deal I managed to pick up on eBay. I paid probably more than I would normally, however there are some juicy parts in there. I paid £49. I'm going to upgrade the graphics card. The way things work, we take the value of the graphics card that's in there, and obviously add the replacement in there, and maybe put an SSD in there as well. I'm really not 100% committed on that. But yeah, we'll take it out. So we take the side off, we'll have a look inside, and then I will start the upgrades, which will be in the form of a quad-core processor. If I remember rightly, it's the Q9300, maybe 8300, I can't quite remember now. I'll ping that up on screen, and I picked that up for a tenner. And then I'm going to be taking one of the 7850s out of there, which I'm currently testing in Crossfire, pretty cool, and popping that in there and see what this thing does. But yeah, let's crack the side off and see what we got. Okay, so out of the box, this was what we've got. Just a basic PC really, a couple of small hard drives. I think they're only 80 gig maybe each. Perfectly fine for what I'm doing here. Corsair power supply, which would be pretty useful. Obviously that'll be going towards another build at the end. It came with 8 gigs of RAM, which I'll whip out in a second. We'll check the speed. It's a dual core processor in there now. I can't quite remember the model, maybe an E5500, I'm not 100% sure. And originally it's come with an R7 242GB, which will be coming straight out. Yeah, let's get upgrading and see what this puppy can do. Right, it's all wired up, got power, etc, etc. I suppose there's not really much else to do except see that the processor works. I may have needed to update the BIOS. I'm feeling some instant regret because I should have A, turned it on and tested it before I did anything, and B, upgraded the BIOS to the latest version before doing anything. But there we are, I've done it now. Let's crack it on. Hopefully everything all works together. Okay. Is it the usual power supply not on? Yes, it was. Oh, it's making a noise, and yeah, there we go. It's coming up on screen. Ah, wonderful. Okay, well, I suppose there's not much to do apart from maybe get Windows on there, so it should kick in a second. New CPU installed failed, and there you go. I think I'll take care of that now. Then maybe I can do it with you guys on camera. Let's have a look. Well, that's all good. Aha. Well, that needs to change. Okay. So I could overclock if I wanted to, but I don't think I've got a cooler that's going to fit. I do have a spare fairly meaty one, but everything on the motherboard, hopefully if I remember I'll cut in some footage now, around the processor is really tight. So I did try off camera because I wasn't overly keen on the cooler that it came with. A couple of the legs were a bit weird. Let me reach for this. I do have this puppy spare, but it just didn't fit. There's not enough room, there's too much stuff going on around the processor, so yeah. There we are, yep, Core 2 Quad 9300. Wonderful. Don't really need to see much else there, I suppose. Quick look in here. Oops. Yeah, perfect. Let's crack on, get Windows on there and see what we're dealing with. But so far, so good. Okay, it's not gone as smoothly as I thought, although I've got Windows on there. Hopefully I might see the issue in a moment. I think something was wrong with the cooler, because basically it kept turning off after maybe 10 seconds or so in Windows. So I noticed the old cooler was essentially just hanging off. One of the feet is snapped, so I tried a bit harder to get that thing on and was able to do so, but only in that orientation. There's simply no room to get it done sideways, so yeah. I'm just going to restart this now and hopefully you can see the problem. So as you can see, it loads up Windows fine. Admittedly, I have just changed the cooler, so I might be right, it might just be overheating and turning off, but okay, looks like I have fixed it. It was in fact overheating and turning off, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and get the drivers installed, but yeah, looks like the cooler has done the trick. Whew. Right, the Windows install has gone well since attaching that cooler anyway. I've added a couple of fans, as you can see. Put a nice blue one in front that I got for free with a case I recently reviewed, I never used, and I've just put a little one at the back there, so there's quite a nice flow of air through. If I can, I may consider overclocking this as well, but for now I think the main thing to do is to get some games downloaded and start benchmarking it. But yeah, as far as the end build goes, I actually think it looks pretty swish, to be honest. What do you think? I suppose it's time to see how it performs. I couldn't stand having that cable going there as well, so although this case has got very few routes for cables, I was able to feed the 4-pin up the back and then stick an extension on it to go that way instead. It looks a bit better. Yeah, not too bad, really. Hopefully it continues to be quite stable, or at least if I decide to overclock it that may change, but we'll see once these games are downloaded. Yeah, not much else to say really. So far, so good. Let's see how it handles things. So before we get into the Cinebench benchmarks, as you can see on screen, I was able to get this with a slight overclock to 3 GHz. That's mainly thanks to the motherboard, which would actually allow me to use the RAM at the full 1600 MHz. This in turn pushed everything else up, so it gave me a nice round 3 GHz, which I was quite pleased with. Maybe you can make out the time on screen as well. It was quite late and I didn't have a lot of time to finish this competition, so I didn't want to push things further really. But yeah, looking at the benchmarks, as you can see, the original OpenGL benchmark that you get with Cinebench R15 gave us a fairly pleasing result, coming in at just over 50 FPS, which I was quite pleased with really, considering what we've got in there. Once that was done, I moved on to the multi-core bench test, which I wasn't expecting a huge amount on. I'd done some searching on YouTube and saw figures around about the 250 mark, and given the very gentle overclock I'd had, I wasn't really, let's say, expecting an awful lot. However, as you can see, we got a result of 285, which I'm perfectly happy with. We're not achieving maximum standard here, so I don't expect it to compare to a modern system. Considering how old this thing is though, I don't think it's pretty bad. For anyone else interested in what the single core performance is like in Cinebench on this chip, then yep, as you can see we got 75, which is perfectly fine. The test took an absolute age to complete, as you can imagine, but yeah, it is what it is. If that's your cup of tea, there you go. With the slight overclock in place on the CPU, I thought it was only fair to give the graphics card a bit of a push, and I was able to get this to 960 MHz on the core clock, originally from 860, and 1385 on the memory clock, originally 1200. Not bad at all. Once I was satisfied I got that overclock locked in, I then of course ran the benchmark, and as you can see the results were not too bad at all, giving us an FPS of 44.2 and a score of 1112 altogether. Now this is running at just under 1080p, it's in windowed mode, so yeah, not too bad for an old card running on an even older chip. Just as a point of reference, as you can see running at the standard clocks on screen, the Heaven benchmark running at stock speeds on the GPU gave us an FPS of just over 40 and a score of 1019, so yeah, not a bad improvement with the overclock I think. Certainly worth it if we're going to give this system a chance. Now let's move on to the actual games. Now all these benchmarks will be running at 1080p, so something to bear in mind. I could have reduced this, but I thought I might push things and see how it goes. And as you can see with the settings on screen, the results for City Skylines were pretty good. With an average of 32.2 and 0.1% lows of 4.8, it really wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, and hopefully would set off a trend that I would continue to see. But yeah, let's have a look. Next up I fired up CSGO and stuck it on the high settings, which admittedly may have been a bit ambitious. However, when we look at the actual performance in game, we can see it was still pretty good, with a very good average of 91.8 with decent lows of just under 40, and despite what it says on screen, that is a spelling mistake, the lows of 0.1% were actually 7.4, not 74.4. Duh. Let's take a look at Dirt 3 next, and unsurprisingly this thing seems to perform very well no matter what I throw it on. This had really good performance of an average of just over 76 FPS with a very solid set of lows. As you can see, it seemed very smooth during the benchmark test, and considering this is running at the high preset as well, I probably could have pushed it a bit further for a bit more detail, but I didn't really need to. I was very happy with how it looks and ran. Moving on to a slightly more recent racing game in the form of Dirt Rally. Sorry I don't have the second edition yet. This was also a very good experience on the high preset, giving us a very solid average of just over 55 frames a second, and the lows again aren't dipping too badly, so things overall, considering the age of everything, are pretty promising. Let's take a look at Doom next. This was a mix of settings, mainly around medium. And yeah, this was as expected. It does seem to struggle on this particular system. I don't seem to get very high FPS really on a lot of cards, but the average was certainly playable from a console gamer's point of view. As you can see, we're looking at 27.7 as the average, with 1% lows of 15.4 and 0.1 of 13.6. However, although those lows may look a bit drastic, it felt smooth during my gameplay. Good old Violence Fest in the form of GTA 5 next, running at mainly medium settings. VRAM of course would be an issue if you want to really push things up, but if you're willing to take a drop, you can see the performance is still very acceptable indeed. Near enough 60 FPS as an average, with lows of 35.4, dipping very slightly below that for the 0.1% lows. This was certainly a smooth experience also, and yeah, the impressive nature of what we've got set up here on such an old CPU is beginning to shine through. It seems to be a bit of a beast, even despite its age. Now let's take a look at the wanky borefest that is PUBG, and on medium settings the optimizations this thing has gone through are shining through here, as we've got a very respectable average of 41.8. Now this is one, being a competitive game, you may want to drop the resolution down to push this even further. However, you've got to agree, on such an old card running on an old CPU, it's still pretty good, despite the game being a bit pants. Now we're going to take a look at one of my current favourite games, and if you haven't checked it out and like the Left 4 Dead style, you really should. It's brilliant. Vermintide 2 performed admirably as well, considering this thing looks beautiful. On the medium preset, we've got an average of just under 45 frames a second, and the lows didn't dip too badly, with just 25.9 for the 1% and 0.1% of 19.1. Now, although you can see the FPS on screen reflects a little bit differently to that, I did continue to play through the level, and the hordes pushed that average down a little bit, so yeah, to be expected, but I can't stress this enough, this game is brilliant, you should check it out. Battlefield 1 medium preset was also very good. The averages of just under 50 FPS remained pretty solid, although the lows did dip down a little bit. I didn't actually see this reflected in the gameplay I was experiencing, and yeah, for a newer title running on hardware which was released years previously, I'm still impressed. Up next, let's take a look at the bag of toss, which is Fortnite. Now, at medium settings, at full scale resolution, so we're not skimping there, this thing actually ran really quite smoothly. It was a bit hiccupy towards the beginning of the round, which is I think to be expected really on this kind of hardware. Once it had all settled down and everyone had landed, however, it was pretty damn good. Just over 60 FPS means you can still enjoy this game on a very tight budget, especially if your IQ is similar to the average FPS you're seeing. Subnautica now, and on low settings this thing also ran quite smoothly. However, what you'll see with the lows, it was a bit choppy in some places, which is fine. It didn't really hinder gameplay that much, but there was some terrible pop-in throughout all of the textures you can see there on screen, and this didn't improve as I went through the whole area as well. So yeah, playable, fairly smooth, but the pop-in is a bit much maybe on this one, so I would perhaps say that this isn't an ideal game for such an old system. Finally, I decided to fire up one of my favourites, and this was just a complete fail. If you're not already familiar, this is a game which does require certain features to be supported by your CPU, and unfortunately this one is really showing its age. It just does not work at all, and I was greeted with this fine error. So there it is, guys. This is the build in its final form. Nice blue ominous glow from there. You can hear the fans for the graphics card running with that overclock I've set. I probably could have set these to auto, but I just wanted to keep things as cool as possible to give this thing a chance. I suppose my final thoughts on this, would I recommend 775 as a CPU series you should consider? Then honestly, if you're looking to whip together a system for cheap, and I do mean cheap, you do have to pick up a good deal to make it worthwhile. If you can do that and you're willing to sacrifice not playing the very latest games, as we've seen with Apex Legends, and there will no doubt be others, then yeah, I would say go for it. If you can score yourself a deal and build a system for next to nothing, then do it. Why not? It's certainly still usable, and if you didn't want to use it for gaming, obviously it would make a perfect base for something else, maybe a media PC or such, which will probably be what this ends up being for me. Yeah, I definitely would say to go for it, with that one caveat that you do need to make sure you score a good deal. You will see on eBay systems that are sold as quad-core and gaming systems around about £100, maybe even more. Most likely they will use CPUs like this, and that is going to be a problem if you are planning on playing very latest competitive games, or even if you're trying to run it with a very good graphics card, it's just going to bottleneck that thing to death. However, if you stick to older graphics cards like I have done here, then you can certainly build yourself something that's passable. I wouldn't necessarily say capable, but definitely passable. So I suppose it all boils down to what you can get. There are so many people getting rid of old systems that you will no doubt be able to score something like this, maybe not necessarily with the same processor. However, yep, a system like this which you can then overclock if you wanted to. Admittedly it's a bit power hungry, it would be, but it's an option if you wanted to do it. Providing you can get it for cheap, then yeah, get it done. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this build for the competition. If you have and want to check out the others in the series, then please do check the links in the description. I'll pop any other YouTubers that have uploaded videos links in there. If you also enjoyed it, then why not consider subscribing to my channel. I do builds like this, as well as GPU reviews, case reviews, and much more. And hey, if you really want to do me a solid, then drop a like on this, or even say hello in the comments. Anything from you guys is always worth it, so yeah, do be sure to get involved. Thanks very much for watching. See you in the next one. Keep hustling, guys.